All right, we are going pretty quick today because we have a lot to get through. So, Shannon, if you want to advance the slide. So, today's learning objectives, we are just going to by the end of this presentation, you should be able to describe why schools should use data to select well-being interventions and partners, as well as identify several strategies for finding and selecting community-based, as well as other types of partnerships that benefit student well-being. Next slide, please. All right, so quick agenda today. You have the front end with me, where I'm going to be reviewing the data collection process and kind of an important thing to remember as I go through stuff is these are best case scenarios. We certainly recognize that when you are collecting data or using data, you are often not working in the best case scenario, but it is still good to recognize like, okay, so if we had our druthers, if we had control, if everything was going well, what should we be doing? And then the second half of today's presentation, our good friend Norm Stewart is going to be doing a worked example from the Marsing Project and his work with Communities for Youth and so many other partners. And then we're going to be doing a case study and then questions and comments for all at the end. Next slide, please. All right, so first things first, why use data to select interventions and partners from the get-go? And so one of the things we are always saying, both at Communities for Youth and also just in a variety of other practice scenarios, whether you're in schools or a nonprofit or you're a community partner, right, is getting people to recognize that data is really your map for achieving what you want to achieve. So in this case, improved or better student well-being. So data is important because it helps show our areas of strength as well as areas that we can improve upon. It also really helps us zero in on how big certain problems are in relation to one another. So if I look at my chicken legs on the right, I can see this guy, despite the fact that he's not real, obviously, doing really any more upper body work, right? He needs to be thinking about those legs. And this is something we often see in practice is that folks have a strong impetus because they're busy, right? They're putting their heads down, they're getting the work done, they're trying to make it through, and there's a really strong impetus to keep doing what we've always been doing. And sometimes that means focusing on problems that don't need as much support or focus or ignoring areas that could use more support. So data is really helpful in refocusing that thought in both individuals as well as across school staffs, communities, you name it. Data also helps us see how risk and protective factors. So one of the things we've been talking about across this cohort and these sessions for ECHO is what risk and protective factors are, why they're important to consider, right? Using what's established in research and literature and data to focus in on things that actually matter and go upstream of a problem. And data helps us see how those risk and protective factors relate to one another as well as to our outcomes. Also, last but certainly not least, I'm a former program evaluator. I used to work with the CDC, right? Data helps us track progress over time, and that doesn't have to be scary. Next slide, please. So again, this is a best case scenario. This does not have to be exactly what your real life experience with data looks like right now, but we all need aspirations and goals. So when we talk about what we want out of a data process, right? So this is the back end of a data process. So oftentimes we're talking about the front end, particularly when Communities for Youth or through the Idaho Department of Education, Communities for Youth is going and working with schools who haven't done a lot of data collection in the past. We're often talking about that front end of that data collection system, but this is the back end of it. So once we have data that's been collected, right, we want to analyze the data. We want to get those results compiled or sent if you're working with a contractor or a partner on your data, right? And then when we move into this pink segment of this dial, right, thinking about reviewing the data. And so oftentimes when we're thinking about that in a school, we certainly want to make sure administrators, leaders, and school staff are reviewing that data. But we also, if we're really trying to flex, want to make sure data is shared with folks like students, parents, as well as community members, right? That's a large part of what we want when we're thinking about focusing on risk and protectives is, yes, let schools do what schools do best, but also bring in the community, let them help you out. If they can't see your data and they don't understand your data, there's a lot less chance that that's going to happen and they're going to be motivated to help you out. So moving from the pink to the purple, we're then looking at goal setting and planning, and obviously there's some best practices within that. We want to still engage a broad set of partners. We want to do data deep dives, right? We don't want to necessarily stay on that surface level of data. And of course, we want to be using evidence and best practices as much as possible. And then the blue, the light turquoise, we actually want to make changes based on what our data is telling us to do. Now, this is really the scary part for a lot of people, right? Collecting data is scary. Getting consent for youth data is scary. Getting all those systems in place and dealing with all the administration can be scary, but it doesn't have to be. But ultimately, if we're not making changes based on our data set, we're kind of missing part of the point. So we want to make those changes, and then in the longer term, we want to collect data again over the long term at some kind of regular clip to help us with those goals and progress tracking. Next slide, please. All right, so thinking about this pink area, a little bit more of this dial when we're getting into the part where we make decisions about goals and focus areas that we're thinking about with our data. Broadly, we want to think about what are we trying to change, right? Generally, where are we going to place our focus and our resources, right? So not everything requires money, but most things we're going to change require either money, time, focus, right? Some amount of resources within a school. So making these decisions really requires you to go back to your data and ask yourself, what do your stakeholders and partners make out of it? Next slide, please. So, a kind of often skipped step in this process, and something that is very near and dear to my heart, is when we're thinking about this administrative and staff review of the data part. Certainly, we want to look at data we have. We want to honor the effort that went into it, right? Make sure that folks are seeing data, right? All of those good things. But one of the things that folks don't think about quite as much, and maybe this isn't as appropriate as a step for you if you're just brand new to the data collection process, but if you've been doing it for a while, this is a really worthwhile step. Thinking through, right, before I get too far into using my data for things, is my data quality data? And so some pretty common data quality indicators that we use, right, at Communities for Youth, but also are kind of standards across a lot of different data collection efforts out there is, does whatever data you have reflect a large proportion of your student or whatever population you're trying to measure? So with Communities for Youth, we use about a 50% threshold, particularly in newer schools that, but the higher proportion of your population that you can get, the more confidence you can have that your data is really telling you something that's true, right? We see a lot of folks using data from smaller groups of kids or that pretty clearly have holes in them. And it's not that that data is totally useless, have as much confidence in it. So we want to be a little bit more careful when we're using data that we're more unsure about or don't have as much confidence in. Another big question, right, when we think about data that's being collected is, were the questions or the instrument is the kind of researchy term that would be used there, that were used to collect that data validated? So for example, have they been used on other surveys or have they been tested with your population that you're actually trying to get data from? If your questions there are no, again, that doesn't mean you have to throw the baby out with the bathwater, but that does mean you might want to think a little bit more about what's going on in your data process. So what other data sources do you have that you might be able to combine with your existing data to see a clearer picture? So in evaluation, we call that triangulation. Or how does existing data that you do have overlap with the experiences of staff or administrators or other folks in the school? Also, if you know you're sitting on a pile of data that isn't high confidence or that isn't the most useful to you, that doesn't mean you have to be paralyzed and not do anything, right? But that does mean you might want to start thinking ahead for what your next data collection looks like and how you might improve. Again, these things are all easier said than done, but important considerations. Next slide, please. All right, so if you are confident in your data, right, you want to review those survey results. And when we're reviewing survey results, we're usually reviewing something called descriptive statistics. So when we say descriptive statistics, all that means are things like counts and proportions. For some of your data, particularly if you're looking at Idaho Youth Wellbeing Survey data, that also often includes things like the mean or the average or the median occasionally, depending on the measure you're looking at. This also includes things like breakdown breakdowns of key variables or different areas using other variables. So in statistics, we call those crosstabs, for those of you who remember your undergrad statistics class, with even a modicum of fondness, we'll draw on that. But when we think about those breakdowns or crosstabs, right? So if I'm looking at depression by gender or depression by grade or age, that's a crosstab, right? Those breakdowns can be really helpful in helping us see where problems are, where problems aren't. And again, going back to that idea of thinking about data as our map that we want to be using to navigate. Next slide, please. So, when we get to the part where we think about reviewing and sharing our survey results, certainly when we're working with schools, a lot of folks want to share this internal to their school or district before they are sharing it with a bunch of partners. That makes total sense to me. Very, very, very common practice. But when we're thinking about sharing results internally within a school building or a district building, right, what we really want to know from people is making sure that we can accurately capture their takeaways from what they're seeing in the data. So for schools, thinking about how did different groups see the data, right? And then also breaking down what additional analyses folks might want to see. So that might be more crosstabs, those breakdowns that I brought up earlier. So a lot of times when we're presenting overall descriptive statistics with Communities for Youth, right? We might show overall rates of depression in across 6th through 12th graders, right? And folks often want to see that broken down by gender or broken down more specifically based on some other factor, maybe income level of students or something like that. So thinking about those additional analysis, and if you have the ability to do those in-house or you're going to need help with those, is really important. Also, if you do have an in-house data person, I know bigger districts often do, smaller districts don't. This is totally understandable, but do you want to do something like a regression analysis or some sort of other analysis that helps you better understand the relationships between variables? With Communities for Youth, we do run a diagnostic model, and that is what allows us to see a lot of the associations and relationships between our well-being outcomes and other variables like risk and protective factors. So sleep, self-awareness, social connection, things like that. Next slide, please. All right, so really important, and shout out to Blaine County and West Ada, because I think that's where these pictures are from. Didn't know you were going to be spotlighted today, Jim, but you are welcome. So thinking about engaging people in the data, next slide, please. This is just like a fun picture slide. These are just some example questions you might use, either when you're thinking about giving your data back to either your school administrators or your teachers in something like a professional development session, or even when you're engaging students or communities. So, right? So a lot of the things we do with our Communities for Youth regional initiatives, and these are pictures from different work we've done in Marsing over the years, right? What we do is put data on posters and bring it back and share it with different populations. So these are some of the questions that we train our facilitators, whether that be our students or our full-time staff, to use when they are engaging directly with community members to try to get them to understand what questions do they have about the data, what is it that's interesting about it to them, and then we take all of that information and give it back to individual schools. Actually a pretty easy process. It can involve a lot of staff training, but like getting those reactions and capturing those is a really important thing when you're thinking about using your data to make decisions. Next slide, please. All right. So once you've shared data and gotten that feedback that I was talking about, and there's lots of different ways to do it, the way I just said is just one, but you're going to need to decide what you're going to do with all of that information, right? So again, this is hard. There are no fully right or fully wrong answers, but there are some things that you should consider to probably help you make better decisions. So, right, where will you be most impactful with your efforts, right? Where or what changes are most feasible for you to work on, right? So there might be things that are super interesting in the data, but aren't super feasible for you to address either in the short term or just as the school, right? And that might be where you think about a partnership. Also, and this is obviously a super important one, what resources, including your money, your time, the existing knowledge of your staff, can you dedicate to improvement efforts in any particular area? So if you already have a bunch of initiatives going on about one thing and you're going to pick up something totally new, that may not be a great use of your time unless you can shift some of those resources. Next slide, please. All right, some important things to remember when you are thinking about what are the things that really matter. And so this is made up data. This does not belong to any school. I literally threw numbers in Excel and created this beauty. So when we're thinking about things that matter most to schools, right? Oftentimes the basic, remember, descriptive statistics, so those frequencies or those counts or those breakdowns can be really helpful. Fancy analyses can be really useful if you're able to do something with that data, but just using counts and proportions to say, hey, this is a bigger problem than this, there's not really shame in that game, right? You're still using data to locate the problem and say, hey, what is the thing that needs our time, attention, and resources most? So again, our fancy man with the big biceps, right? He doesn't need to do a ton of additional work on those biceps, right? But those legs need some help. Next slide, please. All right. So again, once you've identified goals, right, you have to identify the how. I think this is really, really hard, and I know it sounds like a lot of steps, but thinking through the different things you need to do in the funnel you need to go through once you have data back in your possession, whether you are a school leader or you're a community member that's trying to work with your school, or maybe you're a teacher that's trying to understand, hey, we're doing this thing. What are we going to use this data for, right? Getting specific is essential. So once you've identified your overall goal areas or your focal areas, you want to identify how you're going to address them, right? It's a key part of getting those actual changes made. So two big recommendations I would offer up to you, right, is using existing evidence about what works in terms of intervention and curricula. So if you're already using evidence-based practices or you're already using curricula or programming that you're seeing really good effects of, right, double down on what you know is working or what the other data or other research is going to tell you to work. And two is, of course, leverage partnerships and collaboration, which Norm is going to talk about a lot. Next slide. All right, Norm, floor is yours.
Okay, thanks, Ann. So, as everything that Ann was talking about in regards to using data and with partnerships, really for us in Marsing, this is trying to show and demonstrate how we've used our data and used our partnerships, and really all the things that we've accomplished and been working on through the years since 2019 really all relates to our partners, and we couldn't do it without the partners. And so, starting off with just talking about our Marsing project. Next slide, please. Really, starting with our Marsing project, which really didn't start as a Marsing project. It started, as I've talked about before, as a nursing project, because where we didn't have a school nurse and trying to identify the need of having a school nurse in our facility. And then understanding or having this perception or perceived need of a certain area. But as we went through and administered, because we needed data to show the relevance of actually having a school nurse, that allowed us to see what our real issue was, which was not vaping, which we thought it was, but it was having to deal with the student depression. And as we started researching and looking more into that, it's really trying to look at the partners that are in place. That was a project that was being funded by the Blue Cross of Idaho Foundation for Health in a partnership with Communities for Youth. And then how can we show the relevance of having that? And that's where we discovered, as we've talked about before, our depression rates, which were extremely high at the 66%. We also learned at that point and using the data to understand that kids weren't being nice to each other and they needed to have a trusted adult. And how can we benefit from that and to use that data and then in turn try to isolate partnerships in order to address that and address those needs that we had seen through that data and to put that in that implementation in place to try to address those needs. Next slide, please. So this is really what happened. And as Ann had talked about, once we had administered that survey, being able to get that data to our administrators' hands as well as our staff and our students. Um, too many times in the past, before we had the well-being survey, we had the YRBS, the youth behavioral survey, that you would get that data 1 or 2 years later, and it was almost irrelevant because some of those kids weren't here. and they had already moved on. And so really having the relevant data has been extremely important. And then in order to take that data of our students that we have currently and trying to address those needs that we see immediately. And by sharing that data with our administrative staff and then in turn our students and our teachers, we're able to take that and then refine it and then incorporating the community feedback as well. We've been able to do this long enough where we've administered that survey 5 different times, be able to organize taking that influence from those groups and then bringing that in a collaborative means to an advisory committee, and then to really develop goals around that and how we're going to address those concerns and needs moving forward using that data in our partnerships. Next slide. So as we went through and used that data in some of our most recent goals, we were really trying to what the strategies were in order to address those needs identified in that data. And we started off with developing family engagement nights. And so looking at how can we continue to not only bring attention through the district, but also to incorporate the community. That's really all of that upstream prevention model concepts in order to make not only internally aware of our issues, but trying to incorporate the community and bringing that in. And that was done through establishing community engagement nights and trying to talk about that data, creating a safe environment for our students and the families, relaying that information to bring people together. And then the second strategy that we had used was really trying to also, as an area that was in need, was physical activity and how that relates to reducing stress levels. And so we also created different events, structured, purposeful events in order to get kids more physically active and making sure that the community and the families knew that that's intentionally what we were trying to do. And so we established summer camps in order to get kids more physically active and moving in hopes that that would address those depression levels. And then lastly, the other strategy that we really used was the communication, trying to, through advisory committee, choose how we were going to use that data and then choosing those concepts to push out monthly in order to make families continually aware and the community continually aware of the issues that we've seen and how we're trying to address those from substance to all the way through to depression. Next slide, please. So as we're talking about how we're using that data, it's also important to be able to identify what partners you can use. We benefited from the influence of Jackie Yarbrough before she went to the foundation through the Blue Cross. She worked for the Idaho Food Bank, and back in 2019, when we were just starting our community school effort, she helped us create a resource map. And this is something that has been critical in some of the efforts that we've been trying to do throughout the years, um, bringing people in. And basically, we invited all the local partners in, using her as a resource to identify those partners because us in school districts, we don't know what we don't know. And so, not having a concept of all the partners that were out there, using a connection within a partnership in order to establish other partnerships. So, inviting all those partners in, relay to them what we are planning on doing and how we're trying to address the needs of the community through our community school efforts, but then also to identify what services those providers could help us in our community school efforts from ages all the way from birth through senior citizens. So basically, our resource mapping activity, very simple, just defining ages up on the board as you see here from 0 to 5, 5 to 12, 13 to 18, adults and seniors, and then also from a holistic community level. And we had those partners that were in that room identify what services they could provide to each of those areas. And then as needs arise through using our data, we have people that we can access, knowing which group can really address that need that is there for that population that we're trying to focus on. Next slide. So for us, as we're continuing to try to work on these efforts, still continuing to administer that survey. Our advisory committee has 33 people on it. So we're taking all the data from the administration, from the staff, from the students, and the community and developing all these goals. And that 33 member is not only staff and students, but it is also community members, it's parents, it's business people, it's the city of Marsing, all coming together to try to focus on that upstream prevention model where everyone takes ownership and trying to lead us in addressing those needs. And right now, our current goals is trying to work on that self-confidence and building that social connection, increasing opportunities for physical fitness, which also ties in with that social connection, having them identify with other people, and then to decrease access to substances. And that is that strategy of, as was talked about earlier, looking at the individual and how that relates to them, expanding all the way to how it also relates all the way to the community and how the community can help to address those needs even at the individual level. Next slide. And this is just a quick reference to, as we talked about our partnerships and people that we refer to when our needs develop. These are just a list of partners that we have and that we continue to access on a regular basis in order to address the needs of our students and the community overall. Next slide. And so again, this is more just to make you aware that these resources are out there, and these are the groups that we use. Everyone will have, depending on where you are within the state, have different lists of partners, and it's important for you to identify them and to understand what services they can provide to you and to your community, your kids in your school district in order to address those needs. Next slide. And in turn, using those partners to bring in funds in order to make that happen. And this is where we are currently in regards to accessing resources and funding for all of our services and where we are in regards to our total amount of money that's been brought in order to make this work happen. Next slide. Real quick, and then this is just again, this is our what the impact that we've seen. We've talked about this before as far as the depression rates, how they've dropped off in the 5 times that we've administered this survey. And on the opposite side, one of the areas that we focused on is physical activity, and we've seen an increase in regards to physical activity, which should in turn address those depression rates. So we're seeing positive aspects. Next slide. But in turn, there's also still work to be done. So what we've seen with the most recent survey is as we've tried to work on reducing as far as improving social connection and trying to address that social isolation, we do see right now the kids that are suffering from the highest level of social isolation, that has actually went up. So there's still work to be done, even for school districts that have been doing this for a long time. There's still continued work every year that's like a roller coaster ride as you try to address those needs. Next slide. And back to you.
Yeah, so just to wrap up, sorry, I'm just in the afterglow of those amazing impact slides, just making my Friday. But yeah, so key takeaways I think that Norm and I wanted you all to have from this are, when we're thinking about improving student outcomes, we have to think critically about data. We need to share data and not hoard it or let it collect dust on a shelf. And we need to use data for planning, goal setting, and tracking progress over time, right? All this is better when we don't have to recreate the wheel and do things alone. So obviously having partners, using existing forms of research and evidence and curriculum or programs, right? Being able to rely on the things that we actually know are going to make a bigger impact is going to help us do all that. And so I think, Shannon, from here, do you want us to introduce the cohort assignment or do you want to? Okay, yes, data resources. Thank you. So really quick before we wrap up, also wanted to give folks some quick data resources. So if you are interested in taking part in the Idaho Youth Wellbeing Survey next year, Communities for Youth and the Idaho Department of Education are currently in our planning process for that. So this is available for middle and high school students. We offer a variety of supports for parent opt-in and the consent process, getting students engaged and using that data. And so if you want to let the Idaho Department of Education know that this is something you're interested in, please do email Katie Watkins. Her email is at the bottom of this slide. You can also reach out to Megan or myself, but Katie is probably your best person. Okay, next slide. And then also wanted to give you guys some couple resources for finding student and family well-being interventions. A lot of these are clearinghouses that let you search. I know Megan in one of our prior echoes had gone over one of them, the Blueprints for Healthy Youth Development. But if you are looking for evidence-based programming or just programming ideas based on your data in an area that you're not as familiar with, or you're trying to add something on to an existing upstream prevention program, these can be really great resources. All right. And then last but not least, Norm has some fun resources for thinking about partnerships.
And so this would be a great opportunity for each of you to be able to try to identify some of the partners that are in your area and how they can address those needs overall. So really, we're asking you to map out the different populations and identify the existing community resources that are there, and then to be able to provide that can provide also help academically, socially, and overall for health and well-being. And then to get specific, not just that something exists, but how does it help the students? How does it help the community members access the services? It's not about just no identifying and saying yes, they're out there, but how do you help them learn how to access them? And so, how do you move them forward with that? What partnership opportunities are out there, and what's the best way to make that tie to make sure your students and your families can access them?
And do you want to just cover this quickly and then we'll go to questions?
Sure. And Norm, jump in if I'm butchering something. So for the cohort assignment this week, we are hoping that we can do a little mini version of what Norm just described was a super helpful process for MARSing schools. So what we'd like folks to do is start by listing out their data or information that they have that helps their school or district understand the various populations they're serving or interfacing with. From just a note on that, if you have data that's older than 5 years, it might be helpful, but it also might not be helpful. So if you have newer data, newer is usually better, not always. And if there's no data available right now, right, we all start where we start and we go from there, and that's fine. But you can always start with what things have your administration, your teachers, your parents, or your kids been bringing up in high numbers, right? So not what did one squeaky wheel bring up, but what are the things you're hearing over and over again that are demonstrating, say, at the very least, people are perceiving that this is an issue. Next slide, please. So once we've listed out those populations and the data that we have for them, we'd like you to identify 3 to 4 organizations or agencies that are providing services in your community or regionally, right? So we know a lot of folks in Idaho are using those resources, be those public health, be it early ed, parent and family resources, that might help you address challenge areas in your data. So this is just a really light touch front end system to start thinking about partners and connecting them to what your data or existing needs in your school are. And we're happy to take any questions now, Shannon, or do you want people to put them in chat?
Yeah, let's do questions now. So we have a couple minutes for questions, and then we'll move on to our case for today.
Okay, awesome.
Is there anybody who has anything that they would like to start with?
I have a quick question. When I was in grad school, there was a free add-on to Excel. I think it was called Easy Data Analysis, something like that. Does anyone know or are aware of any resource like that, like an add-on where it helps you do all the behind the scenes of the data?
So R is a free statistical analysis program. You can download it. It's just the letter R. And it has, if anybody has like experience with SPSS, it has an SPSS interface called Blue Sky. So if you like point and click type of operation, that is a free data analysis software and tool. So it's called R and R in Blue Sky.
Thank you.
I would just add on, I don't know about the plugin you're referencing, Barbie, but when I'm talking to, a lot of times when I teach both undergrad, masters, and master's students, and a lot of times when I'm talking to master's students and we're trying to prep them for what they may or may not have in when it comes to analyzing data. A lot of times we just talk about Excel and Google Sheets. And like I said, certainly those aren't there are limitations to those when it comes to doing some of those more advanced analysis, but just using Excel for kind of basic like frequencies, counts, proportions is actually pretty easy. And there's so many good YouTube resources. Like that's one of the things my master's students do in class is just as a group go and find different YouTube resources and recommend them to each other as like a, hey, this is something to keep in your toolbox for the future. Because just running really easy formula, like it doesn't have to be super intimidating. And Excel or Google Sheets, even their most basic, the great thing about them is because they're so widely available, so many people use them. And so I would, like I said, I don't know about that plugin, and certainly the R and Blue Sky resources Megan referenced are useful, but there's no shame in using the basics.
Anne and Norm, thank you guys so much. This was such a great presentation. I want to make sure that we have time for our case today. So I'm going to turn it over to Amy. Amy Hopkins is with us from Payette Academy. And Amy, I'm not sure if you're presenting or if somebody else from your school is kind of doing it, but I will let you, I'm going to pull up what you had submitted, but feel free to just talk through it for about 5 minutes and then we'll get into questions, recommendations, and whatnot.
Okay, so my name is Amy Hopkins and I'm principal at Payette Academy. We're an alternative school in Payette that services students grades 6 through 12. Our enrollment is about 115 now, and we struggle with parent involvement and community involvement. We have a lower level of parent engagement than we'd like to see, and that reality presents challenges for both our students and our staff. We have a unique population of students and families that we serve. Many of our students are behind in credits, facing attendance challenges, behavioral concerns, or personal circumstances that have disrupted their educational process. Because of this, the families often face complex life situations that made like traditional school involvement difficult. So one of our reasons that we have low parent engagement is work schedules and economic demands. Many of our families work multiple jobs, late shifts, or have schedules that don't allow them to attend traditional school events during the day or early evening. A second is prior negative experiences with schools. So some of our parents have struggled with school themselves or had difficult interactions with educational institutions. Parents have felt judged, misunderstood, or disconnected from schools in the past, so they might be hesitant to like join in again. For some families, walking into that school building can bring back memories of failure rather than partnership, so that encourages a low engagement. We have some communication barriers. Families change phone numbers frequently, don't check email regularly, or don't have consistent access to technology. So in some cases, language barriers make that more difficult. Our district does employ a full-time translator, so the language barrier is lower on our like needs list than things like access to technology or like keeping cell phone numbers. The reality is that alternative schools sometimes receive students only after years of academic or behavioral struggles. So by the time the families arrive at Payette Academy, they feel discouraged, overwhelmed, or unsure on how to help their child succeed academically. This can create a sense of disengagement, not because parents don't care, but because they're uncertain about what their role is at the time. It's important to emphasize that the vast majority of parents do care deeply about their children. They do want to be involved. They want them to succeed and graduate and have opportunities in life. So our responsibility is to create systems that make engagement easier, more welcoming, and more meaningful. So some ways that I don't know if you want me to talk about like some solutions that we're trying to put in. Okay. So the first solution that we like are working towards, and this is my first year as principal and only our second year in a building, so everything here is really new. So we're trying to create flexible and accessible communication options. So we've relied on events like parent teacher conferences, open houses, or meetings that are typically during school hours. So We are trying to offer virtual meeting options, phone conferences, flexible scheduling. We try to have staff meet with students before, after work, during breaks in their day. We're looking into like text messaging systems such as like Remind app or something to that, or like Google numbers where they have access to like text messaging, but not directly through like the staff member's phone number. Um, we try proactive, positive communications. So we try to have our staff reach out to students before there's a problem, when there's anything little or, it might seem insignificant, but we celebrate progress, improved attendance when they get a credit and positive behavior. So, and we try to create meaningful opportunities for families to feel welcomed within our school community. So we send students out into our community. Right now we have students helping at the museum in town. They're preserving some 100-plus-year-old newspaper articles and stuff for the museum. So they're learning about that process and going and helping. We have we had one in the fall. We were trying to find something for spring. It's just been incredibly busy to try to plan something. We had a potato feed. So we invited our families to come out and join us for a dinner. We made it so that it was like as cost effective as possible. We had a bunch of sponsors in the community that gave us like raffle prizes and door prizes, and we had other items to auction off, so it doubled as like a fundraiser. And we had actually quite a lot of support and attendance during that. So it's just just getting ideas together and working our team. I have an amazing team that really like care about the students, and they don't care about the past. Like every student walks through our doors, they get a brand new fresh start. My teachers are really awesome at giving them that fresh start. So it's just trying to figure out creative ways to get the community like bought into an alternative school, which is, typically frowned upon. And then also getting the parents back into a school setting where they feel comfortable and confident.
Amy, this is such a fantastic case. I'm so glad that you guys brought this to our group. Let's just get into it. Who has questions, comments, feedback? Who would like to go? Megan, I see you are already ready to go.
We only have so much time. I would just say the first thing is it sounds like you're doing a lot of things that are great, and that culture shift takes a long time, especially when you're trying to shift out of like a trauma place, which we know that both the students who come to your school by virtue of why your school is there, and also their parents and families have had lots of bad and negative experience with schools. And so I think you're doing a lot of great things, which is being proactive, creating those meaningful connection opportunities. And I would just say, like, I think the best thing you can be doing, Amy, is reminding your staff that this culture shift is going to take a long time, and that you're all doing the right thing, and kind of highlighting those great moments of momentum or small wins as you go along. I feel like when we talk to you in a couple of years, you're going to be like, oh, yay, And so I just think, I mean, you just said we just got into a building. I'm brand new principal. So I think it sounds really awesome. And I would just say, like, trust in yourself. It's going to work.
Thank you.
Amy, I echo what Megan had to say. It sounds like you guys are doing some amazing things, and we have an alternative school in our district, and the principal and social worker at that school, I feel like, excel in the area of building parent relationships. And some things that I've learned from them are they communicate with parents in a very raw, just open level, and it brings down judgment immediately from parents. They know they can be themselves. There's no judgment from the school, and they build these really open relationships where parents will call and talk about their personal struggles as they're communicating about their children's struggles. And so I think that's one thing I've noticed that really has been successful. And then they make it very personal. They'll go to the student's house and put a sign in the yard celebrating that the student is now a dragon attending Silver Creek High School. And they really build this mentality that we're in this journey together, and you're part of our school now as a parent. And I think that deeply personal experience has been amazing for our alternative school students.
I just want to echo the two things that have been shared already, Amy. I think you're doing a great job. I'm Alexis, and I'm the immediate past president for Idaho PTA. So the oldest and kind of largest state association for parents and child advocacy. And on your sheet, you had written, you want more parent involvement. And so I was actually kind of curious, what does that mean to you to have more parent involvement? Like when you guys write that, what does that mean for you? And then I'll tack onto that. The reason I ask is because even in our middle school and high school communities where it's not alternative, like schools are still struggling to try to get parents, to show up and do different things. There's actually often just a small group of parents, and so what schools want looks different. So I'm just kind of curious, when you say you want more parent involvement, what does that mean for you?
So for us, we want our parents to come in and feel like they can come to any of our celebrations that we have. Come in anytime if they have questions, or I want them to feel parent involvement to me is having them feel confident and comfortable, like coming to me with their questions and concerns, and reaching out like if there is something that they need, if they're having struggles with food or clothing or any of those things. Like these are all things that my building, like I have a clothing closet right there in my building. I have a community laundry room built into my building. So when they need something, I want them to feel like engagement would be them coming to us to help them solve that problem first. And then we can give them other resources and stuff, but just not having them do that struggle on their own, having them partner with us for that struggle, and doing really what's best for their kids, because their kids know these things. They know that these things are available. The kids will sometimes bring in like laundry or do stuff, if they need it done, but I just want the parents to know like that's available for them too, and just getting that out there. And so even for the community, if we have elderly people who need help with that, we can, we have these amazing students at our building who would be willing to help do, they would do the laundry for, elderly folks in our community that need that help and stuff. And so just realizing that like alternative school kids, just because they're at a different school doesn't mean they're a bad kid. Like they just had struggles in the general academic setting. And so just having parents, kind of promote and be proud that their student is at our school and that they are achieving their goals and their dreams.
So, at your school, thank you for that. At your school, do you I'm just curious what parent pickup and drop off looks like, because you've got 6 through 12.
So we run one bus for our whole academy. So we have our own specialized route. We start at a different time and we end at a different time than the other schools in our district. So, but we have just like right up in the front, we have people like I have some very awesome like paras that work for me that are out there every morning greeting kids, opening doors, doing anything like that. I have an amazing like secretary slash registrar that is always like, she is like the sweetest person, like the parents just love her, and so like all these things that we've put into play, having these amazing like outgoing people really helps. But like we don't have a ton of students who get picked up and dropped off, but there is people outside to like greet them when they come, like and open doors and stuff for them.
Okay. So I want to share that one of my favorite things that I ever saw and experienced was the principal was out front, like all the time, like out front. And so everyone knew him. And what's interesting is as my kids have gone to middle and high school, often, and I get that it's different at your school with smaller numbers, but my kids like didn't even know who their high school principal was at Eagle High. Like she just kind of hid. And it was sad for me as a parent. And even as a parent, I didn't necessarily feel like, oh, I could come in and participate and do those things. So I love that you have presence out front, and I think that's just so valuable and important. And the other thing that I would just say in terms of like parent and wanting to make sure that parents feel welcome, if you don't have like a traditional kind of setting, I think that something that I've observed is that as a leader, sometimes I hope that people will just volunteer and say, "Hey, I'll help with this thing." Um, And often I think people need to be asked explicitly, like, or say, like, hey, I've got this like thing. Could you help with this? This is my idea. And I think that it's been my observation that that can sometimes get the ball rolling and getting more parents involved in that space. But bravo, like bravo, because it's you guys are doing a great job.
Thank you.
Other thoughts, questions, recommendations from panelists or from audience members?
My name is Lou House. I'm also at the academy, and I'm with Payette School District, kind of doing. I kind of go to all the schools and work with all the students that need some help. I'm wondering from the panel though, is there, I think one of the things that we might be struggling too with is finding out how to really connect with the data. Is there a data measure that you guys have found successful that helps kind of get to the nuts and bolts of, are we asking the right questions? Are we on the right path? And that's kind of what I'm wondering. I hear a lot of great ideas, but I'm still a little bit confused as far as what kind of questions did you ask that really got you to where you needed to be. I like the example that was given today, that they thought they needed a nurse and they found that they were asking the wrong questions. They actually needed to go further. So I'm wondering if you guys have experienced that in the work that you've done. You're obviously been at it longer than we have. What have you found that really worked well? What did you find that maybe you shouldn't gone down that path that was streamlined things for us?
I mean, I hate to toot our own horn, but the Idaho Youth Wellbeing Survey is a tool that we feel very confident in collecting the right information across lots of we've tried to make it as streamlined as possible, but we also look at both, like, not just the outcome measures, so not just like absences or attendance or achievement or mental health, but really looking at the risk and protective factors. And again, not just at your school, not just in substance use, but really looking at across family, community, school, self, peer-to-peer interactions. And we've tried to make it both comprehensive and as succinct as possible. And the reason is because you really need that full picture to be able to look at the relationships across those different things, rather than just like, if you just do, for instance, like a tobacco use survey, then you only have information about tobacco use and you don't have the information about how tobacco use might be related to family relationships, or tobacco use might be related to mental health conditions. And so really, I would say, if you're in Idaho, which it sounds like you are, Lou, and if you're in Payette, which it sounds like you are, Lou, I think the Idaho Youth Wellbeing Survey, because it's been tested and kind of refined over many years in this particular context, it really could be the right step. And then the advantage to doing that, because of the Idaho Department of Education's partnership, is they help us help schools navigate that data. So you're not just getting a bunch of numbers back that's like not helpful. What you're doing is you're getting not only the numbers back, but you're getting a partner in helping you navigate through that data, kind of look at the main things that we're seeing and help you make decisions about how to move forward with that data. And so that would be my recommendation, but I'm open to other people and I do want to hear other ideas. I just wanted to kind of make sure that was clear, that that is a tool that's available for free to you right now.
And Megan, I would add on that the benefit of having the data share outs, as far as whether it's with your staff or the community, but the really a real beneficial group is your students, and to be able to get that feedback because it's their data. I mean, we're as adults and the community, we're trying to take that data and try to understand why those results are what they are. But when you're asking the kids and you have the data in front of them, well, why do you think, as far as it's your age group, your peers that were responding this way, and to be able to get that input from them is very helpful in order to help make those plans on how to address the needs.
And not to turn this into like a I mean, we love Communities for Youth, right? We love you guys. I'm not trying to only promote Communities for Youth, but Megan, if people are looking to, I know Anne had mentioned that Communities for Youth is kind of looking at next year and making plans for that. If there are schools on this call who want to be part of that, how do they go about doing that?
Yeah, so you can reach out directly to Idaho Department of Education, Katie Watkins, or I will go ahead and drop my email in the chat, and you can reach out to us directly at my email. I know that seems weird, but we are a tiny shop, and yep, it comes right to me. So, yeah, so if you are interested in either of those, it's actually Katie Watkins, not Walkins. Sorry for
That's
echo.
me. She's my colleague. I'm the one with the. I'll fix that. Sorry, guys.
Thanks, Hannah. But anyway, those are the two ways that you can reach out and get more information. This is a great time to be thinking about it because we see it work best for collecting consent if you can get it into your registration packet for the upcoming year. So that's really why we're reaching out to schools right now. You know, our last year we had about 9 schools participating. This year we had 66 schools participating. Everybody who did it this year is in for next year. So that is a good information to you that it is meaningful to schools, and we would love to have your school participate too. Again, it's a free service for any middle and high school across the entire state, public, private, charter, you name it, we got you.
Awesome. Thanks so much. And of course, we'll continue having these conversations and giving you guys opportunities to connect with our panelists. We are going to be back. And so, sorry, Amy, one last thing. I am going to type up all of these notes for you. I will get them sent over to you early next week so that you have them for reference. And then we are going to be back on Friday, April 10th from 10 to 11 a.m. Lexis Morgan is going to be presenting on effective strategies for positive community and parent engagement. So I think that's going to be very relevant to many folks on this call. And then we also have a school who will be presenting a case at that time. If you are part of the cohort, you should be receiving an email in just a little bit about your assignment for the next 2 weeks. So just make sure you guys get that in. Thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of your Friday. I know many of you are on spring break. Enjoy.
Bye. Thank you.